Hi, I'm Adrian Strittmatter. Welcome to Bricks and More. I'm the CEO and co-founder of SAENTYS, a global creative consultancy specializing in destinations, real estate, and the hospitality sector. Bricks and More is all about exploring how to generate, unlock, and maximize real estate value. Our mission is to challenge outdated and limiting notions of how this is done. In each episode, we talk to top professionals to uncover innovative strategies that drive short, medium, and long-term gains. So if you're passionate about making real estate more valuable for more people, you're in the right place. Welcome to Bricks and More.
Today, we will discover a real estate value unlocker, which is not square footage efficiency, design finishes, or tenant-led amenities, but something much more technical: your energy strategy. What if controlling consumption and managing assets like energy storage systems turn cost into ROI? I am absolutely thrilled to welcome Lorna Walker, co-founder of Camion Energy, a company helping real estate owners and investors unlock asset value by electrifying portfolios at scale and staying ahead of grid capacity constraints. A driven and entrepreneurial leader with over a decade in senior roles at CBRE and experience of co-founding a modular housing startup, Lorna combines deep real estate expertise with a passion for innovation and sustainability. Her work at Camion is shaping how energy optimization can drive NOI growth, enhance lease appeal, and future-proof assets, all while tackling one of the biggest challenges in real estate, the energy transition. So let's dive straight in. Lorna, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
It's lovely to have you on the show. We started working together a long time ago now when you were at CBRE. Can you tell us a bit about your journey through real estate?
Yeah, of course. So I've got a fairly traditional real estate background. I started at CBRE, as you know, on the graduate scheme, and I was a non-cognate. So I'd done languages and economics, and I did a part-time master's whilst I was there. I did various different things at CBRE: valuation, mixed-use development, real estate finance. I'd say it was always very valuable early in my career to do that real estate finance piece. I was working in the loan and corporate recovery side at the time of the financial crash. And actually one of the best ways to learn how to do real estate right is to actually learn how people have done it wrong. So that was a really great experience. The bulk of my time at CBRE, though, was in capital markets. And you and I crossed paths when I was in the European capital markets team. And then I was very lucky to then work in the UK capital markets team. After CBRE, I'd bought out this business called Frank Warwick. There was a guy called Franco Sodoli who came across there, and I joined Franco as his right-hand person to navigate the world of CBRE. And one of the things that was really great about that is I wasn't pigeonholed into one specific niche of the market. I actually got to do a bit of everything. You know, one week we'd be selling a messy industrial estate on the outskirts of Manchester, and then the next we were selling Madame Tussauds in central London. And you would do everything in between: shopping centres, business parks. So it was a really great experience to actually understand the whole market. And I think the other thing that I really got from working with Franco and the team that came across was they had this real entrepreneurial spirit. And so actually it was this great mix, because you had this really sort of ambitious entrepreneurial vibe, but you were also inside this big corporate. And CBRE did a very good job as well at trying to harness that and capture that whilst in a corporate environment. And a couple of the other things that I did at CBRE is I was very interested in sustainability right from the start, before my time at CBRE, and I worked on and led various different initiatives around that over my time at CBRE as that sort of ebbed and flowed and went on the journey that it did. And the other thing was prop tech and innovation, and I was incredibly interested in how that could be used to actually harness solutions and bring them to the market at scale. So I think a combination of all those things, and probably a bit of that entrepreneurial spirit that had been kickstarted by that team that had come across CBRE. I left CBRE in 2020, and I was co-founder of a modular housing startup, which was a really fascinating journey. And then a couple of years ago, I co-founded Camion with my co-founder Jake.
Well, you've talked about sort of entrepreneurial spirit, sustainability, and tech. Would you say that's the kind of red thread that sort of has driven you to Camion Energy?
Yeah, I think that's probably a pretty good way of putting it. Maybe if you were, I think, to put something around it, you'd say it was innovation that has been some of that common thread, and actually looking at how do you innovate so that we are creating and nurturing the best places for people to live, work, and play? Because ultimately, that's what real estate is.
Yeah.
And actually, just yesterday, we were chatting to a big fund, like landlord, who's actually got several funds, and they gave this amazing example that across all of their funds and all of their real estate, there are 10 million people that live, work, and play across their real estate estate.
In the UK?
It's a global,
Okay, because I was going to say
client,
that's like
global client. But what's
that's
incredible?
amazing,
So it's a global client, and they are very big. But they're not the biggest. But they are
still
big.
10 million
but
people,
there's several. There's many others out there of a similar scale,
Mm.
and it was actually such a lovely way to look at it. They've got 10 million people occupying their buildings, and they want to live in the best way possible. They want to work in the best way possible, play, whatever they're doing in that real estate. And so actually, I think our responsibility as real estate professionals is to look at, okay, well, that's the size of a city bigger than London. And
It's
so
the Swiss population.
it's the Swiss population. There you go.
Well, not yet, but nearly. Yeah.
Yeah,
it's true.
And so I thought it was a really nice way of looking at it. And actually, so I think as, stewards of the real estate environment, I think for me, it's about how do you use innovation for that real estate to reach its full potential so that those people who are operating in it can reach their full potential.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice way of putting it. And I think that looking at the benefits that you can bring to, as you said, occupants, investors, stakeholders within that, I think is in essence the right way of putting it in terms of the benefits. In terms of Camion Energy, would you be able to give us a sort of, well, firstly, a bit of an anecdote of where did the name come from?
And as you know, I love that you pronounce it Camion Energy
Camion,
because you're one of the very few that does. And that is because, as you know, the origin of Camion is lorry, is truck, which it's camion in French and is also camion in Spanish and a few other languages as well. And so the origin of Camion is you've got the meeting of these two different worlds, real estate and clean energy, and they're coming together, and there's huge opportunities there. And how do you unlock these opportunities? And actually, one of the ways that you unlock these opportunities is by really understanding the demand for energy. And sometimes the reason that clean energy infrastructure doesn't work is because there's not enough demand. And so rather than seeing the demand for energy as a problem, we see it as an opportunity. And so this is where the truck and the HGVs come into play, because actually they have a huge energy demand. And so if you are bringing that energy demand on site, let's say to a warehouse, then actually that energy demand is something that might unlock the viability of a solar and battery project, for example. And so that was the origin of it. We started with it and it stuck. But I think it very much tells the story of what we're trying to do, is that you've got real estate, you have energy, and energy demand is this actually amazing lever that can help to unlock the opportunities that exist.
And so clearly in that sense then, there is that opportunity, but Camion is also, as you said, or we've been talking about, mission-led. How does that come into the sort of the overall idea, but also how does it make the proposition different that you guys are coming with?
Yeah, so I think it's about the way that you're bringing these two different industries together. So you've got the real estate piece and you've got this clean energy piece. And one of the things that we're doing, which I think really differentiates and makes what we're doing different, is that the foundation, though, of having brought those two things together is that there is a foundation of tech and data science and AI in what we're doing. And actually, the only way that you can really properly solve energy and actually reach the right conclusions and act in the right way is with data. And that's why the AI and the sort of data science behind it is so important.
Solve the energy, I think, is topical at the moment. Is electrification one of the solutions, or how do you see this energy crisis or challenge or opportunity? How do you see that being solved or harnessed if we're looking at the opportunity?
You're right that energy can be a challenge, but I very much see there is a huge opportunity here with regards to energy and what's coming. I think one of the stats that I think is quite interesting around this is that in Europe today, 20% of energy demand is electric, and by 2050, it's forecast that 60% of energy demand will be electric.
And that's demand, that's not supply.
Yeah, that's demand. So the
crazy.
shift will go from, there's at the moment 20% of energy demand, and you're using sort of fossil fuels and other
Hmm.
energy fuels
Hmm.
essentially for the rest of that, and that's going to move up to 60%. So there's a huge shift there, and so yes, like electrification, is
Hmm.
absolutely one of the ways in which this is going to evolve and transition, and the solutions as to actually how we support that transition, they are myriad, and we think that on-site energy infrastructure
Hmm.
is going to be a huge part of that and is going to be incredibly important.
Diving into sort of where the topic around how real estate meets energy, and maybe it's something that everyone takes from their sort of personal approach to energy. I've got my electricity bill, got my gas bill, and most people then see energy as a cost. How do you see it as a value generator then?
Yeah, so I think one of the really interesting things for commercial landlords
Hmm.
is that actually energy has this potential to be this opportunity and to create value for them. And so if we take, for example, the case of an industrial and logistics building, and you've got a tenant who's in there today, and let's go down this route of they might be electrifying their fleet of vehicles. And
Hmm.
and actually just a little note on that is that as at today, it is break even or actually cheaper to own an electric light commercial vehicle compared to a diesel light commercial vehicle from a life cycle cost basis. So it makes sense to own an electric
And that's only going
vehicle.
to get better as
And
well,
that's
isn't it?
only going to get
Yeah.
better, and at the moment, HGVs aren't quite there yet, but that's definitely the direction of travel for electric HGVs, for example.
Hmm.
So you've got a fleet that's electrifying, and at the moment, there's a significant cost there, which is being spent off-site. So that tenant is fueling their vehicles, at a petrol station
Hmm.
down the road on the nearest motorway. They might sometimes have a tank on site that's being supplied, but that cost essentially the landlord doesn't have anything to do with that sort of money that's
Hmm.
being spent. Whereas you've now got this opportunity to essentially participate in that spend that's going on.
Hmm.
And it's significant. And actually, it varies. But if you look at the total operational costs of a logistics tenant in a building, the fuel piece of that is actually around 15 to 35% is spent on fuel. And at the moment, that's happening off site. And you have the potential to capture a portion of that on site. And what we would say is you're doing it in a way, though, that will work for both you and for the tenant. Because
Exactly.
actually,
Yeah.
you can provide that energy to the tenant at a cost that will be slightly less than they'll be able to get elsewhere, or than they might be able to get from the grid.
Well, exactly. And it's a bit like putting, we're talking about on-site amenities for offices to make them desirable. This is clearly one for a logistics site.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, in terms of that sort of electrification of the portfolio, how prevalent or how many landlords are looking at that now?
I think it's a really great question. I think where we're at now in the market, there's a lot of landlords who are aware that they need to better understand energy.
Hmm.
So I think there is some awareness that they need to better understand energy, but there's very few who have actually really started to fully embrace that and act on it and make it happen.
Mm. Is that also because that was my sort of next question with regards to sort of how many ways can real estate investors or owners generate sort of an NOI uplift through energy infrastructure? Is that something maybe an open door as to where they can start looking or
Yeah, it definitely is.
yeah.
And I think we think that the best way to unlock this is to help landlords understand where they can make money.
Hmm.
And that is
Yeah.
the easiest way to do it. And that is absolutely the approach that we've taken. And the way that we see that this is scalable is
Hmm.
this is something that makes money, and you will have a positive return on investment, and it makes sense to do it from a commercial perspective. And that's the lens through which they should be looking at it. I think what's important to understand as well, though, is that these landlords are real estate experts, and
Hmm.
they're great at real estate, but
Mm.
actually energy is very different, and you do need a different skill set, you need different experience, you need different understanding, and you also need this data piece that we've touched on,
That
is
you
that
touched on, yeah.
there's huge amounts of data that feed into this, and you need to know how to use that data to make the right decisions. So this is why you also need the right support to make those decisions.
And then if you look across asset classes, how does that also work for let's say, office or a resi portfolio or retail, or how does it equate across sort of asset classes?
Yeah, so there are opportunities across all those different asset
Hmm.
classes and across different countries. And the way that we look at it from a Camion perspective is we bring in all of those different data points. And actually, this is again
Mm.
where actually having a platform where you can map all those data points against each other helps you to understand. You're looking at a sector, you're looking at a tenant, you're looking at how much energy they're using, what time of day they're using that
Hmm.
energy. You're looking at what the
Yeah.
alternatives are. So there's all these different data points that go in, which is why actually it can be quite difficult to say this is the specific sector where it's going to make the most sense,
Mm.
because actually in different regions or sectors or building profiles it will be different. And so that's where having the ability to run lots of different scenarios actually helps you to figure out where are you
Mm.
going to be making the most money. But I think I would say there are opportunities across all of those different asset classes. But you are right that at the moment, for example, industrial and logistics assets in the UK, it's very likely that a solar and battery storage,
Mm.
potentially the battery bit, is going to make commercial sense for both you and for your tenant.
Yeah, completely. Let's assume I'm a landlord. I have an extensive portfolio of properties, and I know that there is a huge blind spot, let's say, in my portfolio specifically relating to energy consumption. How do you help me?
Yeah. So there's three main phases to what we look at, and depending on the landlord will actually depend which bit of those phases they jump in at first.
Hmm.
So firstly, there is an analysis and due diligence piece to understand what's there. Secondly is deployment of energy infrastructure.
Hmm.
And then third is once that energy infrastructure exists, there's a management and optimization piece. And the reason it might depend is you might be a landlord who doesn't have any energy infrastructure, so very much for starting at phase one, but you might be a landlord that does have some energy infrastructure already, solar panels, for example. So some of your assets will jump straight into phase three, where we're
Hmm.
looking at that management and optimization piece. And what that looks like is that at that analytics phase, we are bringing together all of those different data sets that we're talking about, from a building level, grid level, energy market level, price of solar panels, bringing those all together. And then on any individual building, what we then do is we look at what are the investment targets
Hmm.
of the landlord and of other stakeholders that are involved. For example, what price is the tenant currently paying for energy,
Hmm.
so that we can look at actually putting that at a price that's slightly lower than what they're paying, so it makes sense for them. So we bring all these data sets together. We then run thousands of different scenarios for any given building,
Hmm.
and we look at, okay, so what's the optimal scenario that lands from that? And once we've got that optimal scenario, we're then able to dig into that in more detail with the landlord.
Hmm.
And something that's also important to understand is that this is where the way that the platform's set up is incredibly helpful, because it's a dynamic, moving, living object,
So
essentially.
if the cost
So
goes up, it remodels everything.
exactly,
Yeah. Okay.
exactly.
Yeah.
So it might be that landlord has got a 15% IRR target. That's what it's got to hit. We run the project and, it only hits a 13% IRR. But we'll keep monitoring that over time.
Hmm.
And we might, for example, then see that the price of solar panels comes down, which is a very real thing that is happening.
Yeah.
So we're monitoring the price of solar panels coming down. And so the CapEx for that project actually is reduced. And so in 6 months' time, actually what will happen is that the asset manager of that building will receive an email, and it will say, oh, hi, Sarah, the building XYZ now reaches a 15.3% IRR based on the following metrics, because
Hmm.
this has changed and the price of solar panels has changed. So you've got this dynamic piece. So that's the first piece of the analytics. Then secondly is deployment.
Just
Yep.
one with regards to data capture.
Mm.
And it's just that when we're running in a different sort of more on the branding consumer side, we have found obviously that not everyone, not every market, not every landlord, not every asset can provide the same data. Have you come across times where the data has been really hard to find? And what would be those reasons or things that maybe landlords need to look at? Like where would be the blind spots that you've found?
Yeah, so we get a real mix in terms of the
Mm.
sort of the quality of the data that you put in, and you're absolutely right. The better the data that you're putting in, then the more
Yeah.
accurate the output that you're going to get. We have a lot of our own data sources that we're able to use. So some of those things, that's what we're relying on in any case. So the external data sources, like the prices of solar panels,
Yeah.
a battery, looking at the grid and understanding the
Mm.
grid, we're able to look at actually is there capacity nearby, if or if you need to upgrade the grid connection, what's the estimated cost of that. Where then we're looking at building data, we sometimes are able to plug in to existing data platforms. So like DeepKey, like Scalar, like Measurable. And we've got clients who are able to provide us with access to those platforms, and we can ingest that data. And actually, that is a real win for everybody. Because at the moment, there's data there which is largely being used for reporting purposes. And we're actually able to take that data and say, hang on, now you can make money with this data.
Super useful, yeah.
So that is great where we're able to bring that data in. Where we don't have that data, we'll use things like understanding who's the tenant, what is their activity in the building, and we then have our own set of energy load curves. And so we'll be able to estimate, okay, based on the fact that we know that it's a warehouse being used by a supermarket, they've got X amount of cold storage in there, then this is going to be the estimated load curve.
So data-driven assumptions, basically.
Exactly. We've got lots of our own data sets that we can draw on where required. And then typically what happens is as you go through the process, you're then able to refine those and make them better. And actually sometimes where you've got a data gap, the best thing you can do is put something on the table in front of a tenant, for example, and say, right, we've run this. We think that you can save, sort of £20,000 per annum on your energy bill. And, we know that already hits the landlord's targets. And they will then say, oh, well, actually, hold on, we're not paying 25 pence per kilowatt hour for our energy, we're only paying 21 pence per kilowatt hour. We'll say, great, thanks for telling us. Now we can go away
and we'll
run the real model and we'll refine it and come back and say, okay, well, here's an alternative model that actually fits the characteristics that you've given us.
So you've done your audit, you've got your numbers, you've run your models, and then you go on to the second phase.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the second phase is deployment, and so that's going through refining the specification of what you're going to be putting on the building. It's going through a tender process. It's project management and oversight of that. Sometimes we'll do that part ourselves. Sometimes we'll work with the landlord or one of their preferred partners to do that, and we'll provide some light touch support as part of that in that second phase. And then once we get to the third phase, that is management of existing operational energy infrastructure. And that gets really interesting. You are monitoring the generation of solar, you're monitoring the consumption by the tenants. So you're making sure, for example, that actually, at a very basic level, that the tenant is paying what they should be for the energy that they're using, so that the energy agreement that's in place between landlord and tenant is actually being adhered to. But you're also looking at things like the operations and the maintenance and making sure that that's happening as it should. And you're looking for like fault identification or, anything that's going on that's not quite as it should be. I had a new one to me a week or two ago. We'd been monitoring a building, and during August, which is a very sunny month, which we have also just had, a very sunny month.
No excuses there. Yeah.
The generation on this building was lower than we expected it to be. It was 10 to 15% lower than what we would have expected. So we spoke to the facilities manager on the ground, and it turns out that a building next door has been undergoing a massive construction project, and there's dust everywhere. And so the solar panels needed to be cleaned. So we had that scheduled to happen in a few months' time, but actually we've expedited the cleaning of those solar panels. And so that means that actually, they'll be generating more solar in a couple of weeks' time going forward. So there's little things like that. You're optimizing for that all the time. And you're also looking for any opportunities to upsize the energy infrastructure as well as you go forward. And again, as things change, because you've got this dynamic living model.
So there's two sort of questions, really. The first one is the scalability, or how do you unlock that energy value at scale across a portfolio? And then also, I think going back to the asset class question, let's say you have an office building, how does it work? Because you obviously don't have, let's say, the roof structure to be able to put tons of solar panels. So assuming that you want to be able to scale, do you have you run different scenarios by different asset classes to be able to have that sort of at scale sort of portfolio model?
Yeah, exactly. So maybe just your first question, at scale, this is where having a model which is, underpinned with very strong technological foundations comes into play, and strong data science. And actually, it's where we leverage AI. AI is very much integrated, all throughout the process. And that is what means that we can move faster and we can move at scale. And, just a couple of years ago, we wouldn't have had this ability to essentially deploy AI agents who've all got different little tasks throughout the process to actually do what we're doing. And so that means that we are able to do this at speed and at scale. The second part of your question, looking at different buildings, that's part of the data that we take in. So, we're looking at what's the roof size. We're able to estimate how much of the roof you're actually able to put solar on. And you're right, going back to that, which asset classes might be typically a really good candidate for something like solar and which ones might be more challenging. What you might find with, say, city centre office tall office building,
Yeah.
if you put any solar on that roof, it will likely all be used up, which is great,
Yeah.
but it'll probably have to be pretty small because, the roof is probably already full of other stuff.
Well, like beehives.
Yeah, like beehives, exactly. Like beehives, or maybe
Like
there'll be a nice
beehives.
roof garden
Roof
to
gardens,
have a
exactly.
glass of wine.
You
and
can't take
look
away
at-
our amenities.
Look at the sunset, exactly. And it's taking those kind of things into account. And so that might mean that for a landlord across their portfolio, we will look at, for example, okay, well, which projects have maybe got the highest IRR, but we might also set thresholds on that in terms of, but which ones actually are you able to deploy a sufficient amount of capital? Because whilst an office building might have a very high IRR, it's such a small system that might not be a priority for them to roll out. So they might decide to prioritize different areas of their portfolio. But again, that's the ability of being able to actually tailor it to what's important to a different landowner.
And then those are the internal factors over which, let's assume as a landlord, you have at least control. What do you say to landlords with regards to external factors? And I think it was something that you and I discussed, like grid constraints or infrastructure not following. What is the lay of the land at the moment with regards to those external factors and those external pressures?
So I would say that those factors are only something to be worried about if you're not doing something about it. It's doing your due diligence, it is understanding the space, it is taking the time to put in an application to the grid to increase the grid connection that you've got at your property. And it might be that you apply for a grid connection and the distribution network operator, the DNO, that's who you would apply to upgrade your grid connection, for example. They might come back to you and say, okay, yes, and actually just as a point of information, they must come back to you with a date at which they can do it. So they will always be able to do it. They have to do that legally, but it might be that it's in 5 years' time.
Okay,
but
so
it's going to be in 5 years' time. And so actually, yes, say yes. Take that grid connection, because if you wait until your tenant leaves in 3 years' time and you then try and apply in 3 years' time, well, you'd be waiting even longer.
Yeah,
so actually,
5 years is not that long when you think
be
of
on the
those
front
things.
foot.
Yeah.
As long as you're proactive about it, then you're able to take these things into account.
Which I think, as you said, it forms, then it is something that the landlord at the very least can be informed about and know about, and that's where you guys come in as well. So you gave a very sort of clear number. I think it was from 25 to 60% or 25 to 50% in terms of shift with regards to electrification.
Yes.
Is the grid ready to deal with such a huge uptick?
There's a lot of infrastructure work going on with the grid. And, I think that if you look at how we're going to deal with such a big uptick, the grid is very clearly going to be a huge part of that, but so is on-site energy.
So it's on time, exactly.
And so actually, it's about looking at how do you look at these things together. And I think one of the things that's really helpful to understand about on-site energy is that the cost of energy is increasingly linked to the cost of distributing that energy.
Exactly.
And so if you have on-site energy, there's no cost of distribution once it's there. Whereas the grid, the energy you're getting through that is increasingly, the cost of that is linked to the cost of distribution.
What's good about that then is that there's a real partnership then between the landlords and their capacity to create, store, distribute internally energy and the grid. The grid says thank you, basically, for people who come down and do that initiative as well.
Yeah, and so, I do think it's a sort of collaborative approach to looking at this. And I think, we need to be bringing all of these solutions to the table. And I think, that stat, we're going from 20% electric demand of the total energy demand up to 60% by 2050. And the only way we're going to be able to respond to that is with lots of solutions.
So it's viewed as collaboration as opposed to like, oh, they're competing against us in terms of energy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Specifically, maybe diving into, and I think this would be super helpful, like a specific case study where, your services were taken, strategy taken into account, and the implementation of those three processes. Can you share one example that you've worked on?
Yeah, of course. I would say there's lots of examples where there's no energy infrastructure at all, and there's a very clear, compelling investment case to go forward with it. What I'm actually going to do, I'm going to give you an example. So this was a landlord who already had some solar on their buildings. So it was an industrial site, and there was 5 different buildings that had solar on them. There were signed power purchase agreements in place across these buildings. That's the agreement that you have between the landlord and the tenant to essentially sell that solar energy to the tenant. But the property manager in place was not an energy expert, and the landlord wasn't collecting any of the revenue that they were due under those agreements. So they had 0 revenue coming in from this solar system that was in place.
But
So
it was in the lease.
it was in this agreement that was in place.
yeah,
So
in
it was
this
signed,
agreement.
exactly. So it's not the lease itself, but the energy agreement.
Energy agreement, yeah,
So
sorry.
it was signed, and so the tenants were expecting to pay for this, but it wasn't being billed. And this is because actually there wasn't anybody to go in and actually look at, okay, well, how much solar is being generated, and to actually monitor, well, how much of that solar is the tenant using, and going into those agreements themselves and having a look. And they were slightly different agreements because, as you'd always expect, that they'd been negotiated slightly differently. So what is the price at which we can charge them energy, and what does that look like? So at a very basic level, we were able to actually go in and say, well, actually,
You're not
there's
charging.
there's about 100 grand a year here, which you are not receiving, which you should be receiving. And so we were able to come in and actually give them the information that's required so that they can actually bill for that energy. So that was.
Do you think that's happening a lot then?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
We can actually say, with certainty that is definitely happening a lot. And I think there's a couple of different reasons for that. One is property managers, they're real estate property managers, great job at being a property manager, but they're not energy people. And so they've never done this, and they don't necessarily have the skills or the technology and the tools to be able to do this. And that's what was happening in this instance. And so actually, you've got people who don't have the skills to do this. And then I think secondly, it's also because there are, I'd say, a number of instances where solar has been put in place and it hasn't been seen as something that's actually a commercial opportunity. It's been put on in order to achieve a sustainability certification, which is great, and I'm very happy about that. One of my other hats is a trustee of UK Green Building Council, so I'm very supportive of that. But actually, to achieve that scale and adoption, you need to view it through a commercial lens. And because one of the other things that happens there is that it means that you have landowners or developers, and they're putting solar on, and it's sized to what the planning requirements say or to what the sustainability certification requires.
Is, yeah.
And actually, it's not being sized so that it's the appropriate amount for the tenant. Looking at what the usage is going to be in that building.
Is that normally higher or lower than what
higher?
Would be?
Higher. So and so actually going back to this example, so they weren't
charging.
They weren't charging for this 100 grand a year, but also the solar system itself hadn't really been sized properly. It should have been a bit bigger, basically. But what it also meant, so we had a look at that, and there was a situation where actually you could deploy some battery storage, and that was also going to provide a additional commercial return at the site. And so that's a recommendation that we're looking to proceed with them as well, that will also help to provide them with some uplift in value.
I mean, that's interesting, isn't it? I think that you've done these changes for certain reasons. I would still think, even, and because we had a sort of a previous guest was a sustainability consultant as well, on the premise that this is going to be a cost and not an opportunity, and that kind of negative bias remains.
Yeah.
No,
I mean, this is something where absolutely you should be viewing it through the lens of it's a commercial opportunity and a chance to make money.
And so what needs to happen for people to look at it in that way? Obviously hire you guys, but
obviously.
Good plug.
Hire us. Thanks, Adrian.
That's always here to help.
I do think that there is a mindset shift that we need to look at, which is actually, electrification is this incredible opportunity for landlords
for
to
everyone,
make
in essence,
for everyone to make a clear commercial return.
Yeah. But super, super simply, it's a commercial opportunity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so approach it from that perspective, and bring in the right expertise to then understand, how you can roll that out and identify and hopefully that will help with that mindset shift and will enable us to reach the scale that's required.
Okay. I think this was when we had the previous guest on the show as well, Georgia Elliott-Smith, was that people are not viewing all these actions as, at the very least, enabling business resilience. But if you try and make, or you do make the case, as you said, of commercial returns, does that not help to push the sustainability agenda as a whole?
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I'd actually say this is probably another thread in the way that, I've approached this throughout my career,
Hmm.
is that if you really want adoption and take up of sustainable solutions, you need to find a way of them being commercially
Yeah,
viable.
it needs to make
Because
money.
once
Yeah.
once you've reached that point, that's when you get the adoption. And there's this incredible example that's happened in Pakistan
Hmm.
recently, where over the last 8 months, there has been 50% more energy added through solar based on the existing energy load of Pakistan. That
50%.
50% more via solar. And that's happened in 8 months. And it is incredible. Now, it's a sort of different setup. A lot of those very small scale.
Yeah, but
And but it's because it suddenly made commercial sense. And there was a lot of, the price of solar panels, had decreased significantly. And so individuals were actually able to source these solar panels and deploy solar at such a scale. And it's amazing to see that sort of
that's
adoption.
crazy.
And I think what that helps to demonstrate is that, once you reach these tipping points, it really changes. And we've seen that in a lot of, industries and subsectors, that once you reach, it's this positive tipping point, actually. And I referenced that, like commercial vehicles, it's now cheaper from a life cycle cost basis, to have an electric light commercial vehicle compared to a diesel light commercial vehicle. And I would expect, that adoption rate to increase rapidly, because once you reach that point,
Yeah, definitely.
then people take it up.
Taking you back 15 years. Don't worry, it's not a bad question. Let's go back to our days at creating IMs at CBRE.
Yes, great.
Great. We're young again.
Fun days.
Fun days. Asset value. So how do you feel, maybe, and you've got a case study or an example, how does it affect it? So you've worked with you guys, you've done everything you need to do. I'm not asking you to give a percentage, but like on the asset value, what would you say? You've gone through that process, you bring it out to investors now.
Yeah. So essentially, you are able to increase your net operating income at a building through adding energy revenue to a
Hmm.
building. And so you're able to then actually capitalize that income into the future. And so I'm not giving you a percentage in terms of value,
Hmm.
but from work that we've done, we've seen that you can uplift the net operating income on an industrial and logistics building from anywhere between 10 to 40% through adding the right type of energy infrastructure
That's
at a building.
insane.
And that's your uplifted NOI. And so that's what you're then going to be looking at in terms of valuing that for the building as a whole.
So in an IM again, you'll have
Yeah.
your tenancy schedule, and then you'll have your little graph with the
You
energy.
absolutely will.
Yeah.
Of course. Yeah.
As
Yeah.
opposed to that ridiculous little fridge sticker, the EPC thing. You'll have a bit
You'll have
more
something about
data to show its
actually
value.
how
Yeah.
much revenue it's making.
Yeah.
And actually this is again though where the data comes into play, and I think is really important. That there is data that sits behind that that's important to understand. So we very much see that actually in that IM that you've got, you might also be including information on how much energy did the tenant at that property consume over the last 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. And it then means that actually you've got even more confidence in how much of that energy they're going to be using, because you've got the data to back it up.
Well, and also the transition's already done. So you've got a clear pathway, especially using, as you mentioned, all the tools and the models of how that is going to develop in the future as well. Obviously, we've talked about sort of the infrastructure, but if we take it out a little bit and talk about the differences between countries, we had Tom Vaughan Fowler on a couple of weeks ago about wired, scored, and connectivity. What is it with regards to the differences of I don't say European or global governments and their approach to this?
Yeah, there is huge difference actually between countries, in their governance, in their energy markets, and how they function, in the price of energy. And so again, that's one of the things where it's incredibly helpful to be able to standardize all of that. And actually the AI agents come into their own, especially in terms of regulatory pieces and understanding that. And I think going forward, that's actually going to be incredibly important to really extract out actually what's important and what's going on. But if you look at specific countries, for example, in the UK, we have a handful of distribution network operators who are those sort of energy providers at a regional level. In Germany, I've heard different stats. It's anywhere between 600 to 900 DNOs. And so it's incredibly fragmented. And so that can actually make it a lot more challenging.
I was going to ask, more challenging.
Yeah, exactly. To understand to understand your kind of position from an energy perspective. You're not dealing with just a few of them like you are in the UK. Actually, you've got hundreds of them. And so it's much more difficult to have a standard approach in terms of what you're doing. And, it's also helpful to understand that the price per kilowatt hour of energy is really different across different countries. So in the UK, the average price for industrial logistics is around 27.5 pence for a mid to large sized occupier. But, there's other European countries where it's down as low as 15 pence per kilowatt hour. So the economics are very different. And so it's something where actually understanding those differences is really important. But there is a lot of differences between them.
Is there a kind of a poster country or like a benchmark that for electrification that you say, okay, they're ahead of the curve across all sort of broad brush across all sort of those points?
I think the Scandinavian countries have done a really great job at this, and actually the way that they're deploying clean energy infrastructure on site, but also the electrification of their vehicles is way ahead. So I think you'd probably say it's the Scandinavian countries and their approach. Having said that, actually the UK in some senses is actually pretty good at this. I think people might get very frustrated sometimes at the length of time it takes to get an answer back from the DNO if they want to upgrade their grid connection, for example. But the DNO has to come back to them with a timescale, and they do, and they'll give you a timescale and they'll give you a cost. So at least you've got some certainty around what's sitting there, and you're able to engage with them. There's not too many of them as we talked about, and you have the ability to roll out your own on-site energy infrastructure. So sort of a bit of a mix.
We're getting to the end of the show. I had two last questions to turn off. The first one's quite a broad brush one, and maybe I think you have touched upon it, but what would you say is the biggest myth about energy infrastructure in real estate?
So maybe I'd say that the biggest myth about energy is that energy is expensive. The reality...
Controversial.
The reality is that the delivery of energy is expensive.
Okay.
And there's a difference there. Because actually, what it means is that 5 years from now, on-site energy, so solar panels on a building, once it's installed, it's virtually free as an energy source.
With no delivery.
With no delivery cost. And we are moving towards a world where energy has an incredibly low cost. If it's on site, the cost is of delivering that energy to your building.
As the podcast's sort of central theme is about unlocking real estate value, can you make a kind of bold prediction as to how energy will be one of the key levers that will participate in that value enhancement?
So on-site energy has the potential to be a real commercial driver. And so predicting into the future, energy and real estate are merging in what they're doing. And actually, a great example of this is, you may have seen that KKR has merged their real estate and their infrastructure divisions into one. And so actually, real estate and energy are not separate things. They are becoming one. And so that mindset will change over time with a recognition that actually we need to be looking at this holistically.
As an opportunity again and not a cost.
Yeah.
Amazing last words, Lorna. Thanks ever so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, Adrian.
It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Bricks and More. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a colleague or friend who would appreciate it. If you're not already, connect with me on LinkedIn, whether to say hello or discuss a destination, real estate, or hospitality project of your own. Finally, please rate the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Again, share the episode, connect with me on LinkedIn, and rate the podcast. I'm Adrian Strittmatter, and I'll be back soon with the next episode.